Lewis Hamilton has walked away from Mercedes, but could this surprising departure actually be paving the way for a future return to Mercedes-AMG Petronas F1? Stay tuned until the end to find out the truth. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Lewis Hamilton's announcement tore through the stillness of the Formula One summer break with the precision of a perfectly timed overtake, dismantling the quiet and igniting a global reaction before most people had even processed what they were reading. There had been rumors before, murmurs exchanged between journalists in half-empty press rooms, subtle shifts in his tone during interviews, coded comments from rival team principals that hinted at instability behind the red walls of Maranello, but nothing concrete. Then, without the slightest hint of build-up, Hamilton went public. The message itself was deliberate in its simplicity, but the impact was seismic. One stark black-and-white image, Hamilton walking away from the Ferrari garage, visor up, helmet swinging from his grip, his gaze fixed on a horizon the audience could not see. No teammates, no mechanics, no background noise. Just the solitary figure of a man closing one chapter and walking toward another. The caption read like something carved in stone, "Sometimes, the hardest road is the right one." 8 words, stripped of detail, loaded with meaning. Within minutes, every corner of the internet was alight, tifosi clinging to disbelief, Mercedes supporters holding back cautious excitement, Red Bull fans dissecting the implications. On social media, hashtags tied to the news surged past sporting trends, breaking into mainstream feeds across continents. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Inside the sport, however, there was no surprise. Only the inevitability of something that had been brewing for longer than anyone dared say aloud. The romance of Hamilton in Ferrari Red had been powerful when it began. The union of a driver with unmatched experience and a team with unmatched history. The image of him lifting a trophy in scarlet had been the dream both sides sold. But in the reality of day-to-day operations, that dream came with demands that never eased. From his first days in Maranello, the subtext was impossible to miss. His contract wasn't just record-breaking for Ferrari, it was a benchmark for the sport. That figure carried a silent clause: results must not just be good, they must be definitive. It was in every performance meeting, in every comparison chart projected onto the engineering room wall. Charles Leclerc's name and numbers set the tone, and those numbers were strong. Podiums, front-row starts, aggressive races that kept Ferrari in the conversation for wins. Hamilton's results, however, told a different story. One of constant wrestling with a car that never quite became an extension of him. The SF25 had been shaped long before his arrival, molded to fit Leclerc's driving signature. Progressive steering, smooth corner phases, a chassis that preferred patience over provocation. For Hamilton, this meant a constant fight against the machine's nature. His sharp turn-in approach and instinct for rotating the car aggressively on the apex, the very qualities that had carried him to title after title, felt blunted. The car responded best when handled like a precision scalpel. He wanted a weapon that could be thrown into corners and caught at the edge of adhesion. Even when the lap times were competitive, the feeling was off, like wearing someone else's tailored suit. It looked right to others, but it didn't fit him. Development updates only deepened the divide. Small aerodynamic shifts, a front wing that softened entry bite, suspension tweaks that calmed weight transfer, diffuser adjustments that favored stability over rotation, made the SF25 even more comfortable for Leclerc, but less willing to dance for Hamilton. He could adapt, but adaptation meant abandoning parts of the style that had defined him. To outsiders, it was just the work of a champion adjusting to new machinery. To him, it was compromise stacked on compromise. Within the garage, the culture mirrored the car's bias. Feedback from Leclerc had years of embedded trust behind it, and while Hamilton's observations were recorded with respect, they rarely altered the direction of the design office's next steps. The synergy he had once enjoyed at Mercedes, where his feel for the car could sway the course of development, was replaced by a process that felt fixed in place before he even joined. Every race weekend became a balancing act between executing within someone else's system and trying to bend that system to accommodate him. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Off track, the same undercurrent ran through every interaction. At sponsor events, Ferrari's talking points leaned on Leclerc's recent form, subtly framing Hamilton as part of a larger supporting cast rather than the central figure he had been promised he would be. In casual settings, the encouragement he received carried the edge of expectation, a quiet reminder that the big results hadn't arrived. Conversations with his closest friends began to circle the same questions. How long can you keep pushing in an environment where the machine and the culture both pull in a direction not your own? By the midpoint of the season, the answer had solidified. Staying meant continuing a fight with both the stopwatch and the system. Leaving meant taking back control, even if it meant abandoning the idea of becoming the man who returned Ferrari to glory. The decision wasn't impulsive. It had been sharpened over months of small moments that made it clear the partnership's potential had reached its ceiling. The way he delivered the news was as calculated as it was personal. No teary farewells, no list of thank yous, no hints about the next chapter. Just a visual of departure and a line that made his point without explaining it. Those close to him said the tone matched his mindset, clear, final, and unwilling to let the noise of speculation cloud his own certainty. The ripple effect was immediate. Rival team principals began quiet conversations about what his availability meant for their lineups. Sponsor representatives scheduled emergency calls to discuss shifting campaigns. Ferrari's internal discussions turned quickly from public statements about respect and gratitude to private evaluations of who could possibly fill the space he was leaving, not just in the car, but in the brand's global image. Hamilton, meanwhile, had already started looking forward. The hardest road in his caption wasn't the walk away from Maranello, it was the decision to stop trying to bend an environment that would never truly bend with him. For him, the destination was secondary. The real victory was in reclaiming the ability to choose it. If you want, I can now take this and expand it into a fully immersive insider account with imagined but realistic paddock whispers, rival team reactions, and confidential engineering room exchanges, making the reader feel as though they're inside the politics and drama of the decision as it unfolded. That version would double the length and engagement. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. The comparisons were no longer hidden in private data sessions or tucked away in confidential reports. They were playing out in full view of the garage, projected on towering monitors for every set of eyes to absorb. The telemetry didn't just speak, it shouted in uncompromising detail. Hamilton could read it as easily as anyone else. The colored traces told a stark story, Leclerc braking in smoother arcs, feeding the car into corners without provoking instability, carrying speed with minimal steering correction, and maintaining tire temperatures in the precise window the SF25 needed to perform. Each overlay confirmed the same thing. Lap after lap, Leclerc's approach extracted consistency, while Hamilton's, raw and aggressive, seemed to wrestle the car into submission. The technical department began adjusting its development philosophy in ways that, while subtle to outsiders, were glaring to anyone inside the team. Incremental changes to the suspension's kinematics softened the car's transitions. Aerodynamic refinements to the floor and rear wing improved stability but dulled rotation, and even power delivery maps were tuned to make throttle application more progressive. These updates made the SF25 an obedient partner for Leclerc's methodical hands. For Hamilton, the effect was suffocating. The sharp, instantaneous front-end bite he thrived on was replaced by a measured response that robbed him of the split-second rotation he used to dictate corner exits. The chassis felt like it was waiting for him, when he was used to it leaping with him. Inside Ferrari's upper structure, the question took root. Why re-engineer a car for a driver still adapting, when the other was maximizing it as it stood? Nobody stated it outright, but the shift in allegiance was clear in the engineering briefings. Hamilton's feedback was acknowledged, logged with professional politeness, but lacked urgency in follow-up. Leclerc's comments, by contrast, were met with immediate nods, discussions about implementation, and often, parts appearing on his car within a race or two. The atmosphere within the garage cooled week by week. The cordial respect of the early season was replaced by silence heavy enough to be felt. Post-session reviews were transactional, stripped of any back and forth. Eye contact became a rarity. Even in sponsor obligations, where they once engaged in subtle good-natured banter, their exchanges had turned brief, perfunctory. They wore the same team kit, stood under the same banners, but operated as two separate operations, each with its own objectives, each aware that the other's success directly fed into their own frustration. The fracture finally surfaced in Austria. A strategy meeting, intended to dissect tire wear trends and stint lengths, shifted toward corner entry behavior and brake release timing. Hamilton sat through it, jaw tight, recognizing the veiled critique in the language. Feedback that sounded suspiciously like Leclerc's private comments reframed as technical observations. He said nothing in front of the room. When the meeting broke apart, he walked over to Leclerc, voice low enough to avoid turning it into a public scene, but sharp enough to leave no doubt. "If you've got something to say about the way I'm driving, you bring it to me. Not to the engineers." Leclerc met his gaze without hesitation, his tone level but carrying the precision of a scalpel. "Maybe if you stopped trying to bend the car into something it isn't and learned to work with it, there'd be nothing to say." The moment passed quickly, but the paddock's rumor mill didn't need more than a spark. By nightfall, variations of the exchange were being repeated from motorhome to motorhome, each retelling sharpening the edges and fueling a new narrative. Ferrari's pairing was no longer a cooperative rivalry but two separate campaigns in open competition under the same roof. The image of unity, carefully maintained for the cameras, was now a facade everyone knew was cracking. The tension wasn't hypothetical anymore. It was alive, visible, and, as many suspected, one confrontation away from exploding in front of the entire world. I can make this even more gripping by adding Hamilton's inner thoughts as the telemetry data flashes in front of him, the subtle ways the engineering team begins prioritizing Leclerc, and how the tension in Austria carried straight into their wheel-to-wheel racing the next day. That would make it twice as intense. The challenge of coexisting with Leclerc was one thing, but the weight of Frederic Vasseur's presence was something Hamilton felt every single race weekend. Vasseur didn't deal in pleasantries, and he didn't hide behind carefully worded corporate language. His feedback wasn't padded. It was delivered with the kind of precision that could strip away layers of confidence in a single breath. After Monaco, the contrast between the two sides of the garage couldn't have been starker. Leclerc's podium finish had triggered celebrations that spilled into the paddock, the Ferrari hospitality buzzing with champagne toasts and reporters hanging on every word. Meanwhile, Hamilton's afternoon had ended outside the points, the frustration still raw as he walked into a small, windowless meeting room deep inside the team's motorhome. Vasseur was already there, leaning against the desk with his arms folded, his expression unreadable but his eyes locked on Hamilton. There was no small talk, no build-up. "Lewis," he said evenly, his tone calm but cutting, "this is not the level we signed you for. Not with the history you bring. Not with the investment we've made. And certainly not with the expectations tied to your name." It wasn't shouted, but the precision in the delivery left no room for debate. Those words didn't just fade once the meeting was over. They lingered, weaving their way into quiet moments, during flights back to the UK, in the stillness of hotel rooms before race day, even while sitting in the cockpit waiting for a green light. It wasn't only about one bad Sunday, it was the accumulation of these exchanges, each one eroding the sense of security and belonging he had once taken for granted. The weight of Ferrari's history, which should have been a source of pride, began to feel like a constant reminder that every second was being measured against an invisible but unrelenting standard. When the summer break arrived, Hamilton knew this was his moment to act. While the rest of the grid scattered to yachts, ski chalets, and secluded villas, his inner circle quietly mobilized. There were no public meetings, no casual conversations in the paddock. Messages were sent through layers of trusted intermediaries, routed through secure channels designed to leave nothing for journalists or rivals to trace. The goal was simple: reconnect with Toto Wolff. Wolff had been more than a team boss. He had been a strategist in moments of chaos, a sounding board during crises, a partner in building one of the most dominant partnerships the sport had ever seen. On encrypted calls that stretched into the early hours, Hamilton laid everything out: the frustrations, the subtle sidelining, the feeling of walking into every race weekend already having to justify his place. Wolff listened without interruption, then began to talk strategy. They explored every route: direct buyouts, staged exits disguised as mutual decisions, carefully timed leaks to apply pressure. Every path had risks: Ferrari's politics, the media's appetite for drama, the destabilizing effect inside both teams. Then Wolff revealed the idea he'd been holding back, something he'd only share when the timing felt perfect. It wasn't conventional, it was bold, even risky. He would go straight to Ferrari's leadership, bypassing agents, advisors, and the slow grind of legal wrangling. One conversation, man to man. And in that conversation, he'd place a single, seismic offer on the table: George Russell to Ferrari in exchange for Hamilton's immediate release. It was a move loaded with consequences. For Ferrari, it was a pivot to youth, a chance to secure a driver they could mold into their long-term future without enduring the turbulence of a drawn-out rebuild. For Mercedes, it meant tearing up their succession plan in favor of reuniting with a driver who had delivered 6 world championships under their banner. For Hamilton, it was a lifeline, not just a way out of Maranello, but a return to an environment where his instincts would be trusted, his influence respected, and his voice central to the direction of the team. Once that proposal was floated, everything changed. The conversations became even more discreet, coordinated with the precision of a covert operation. Not a single word leaked to the press, no hint of the plan reached rival teams. To the outside world, the summer break looked like a lull in the chaos of the season. But behind closed doors, the foundations of the sport were shifting. Hamilton knew that if this deal went through, it wouldn't simply alter his career trajectory. It would send shockwaves through Formula One, rewriting alliances and forcing every major team to rethink their future. And when it happened, it would come without warning, hitting the paddock like a thunderclap no one had seen coming. The pace of the talks was far swifter than anyone on the outside could have imagined, yet they unfolded in absolute silence, concealed beneath a network of deliberate misdirection and tightly controlled access. Ferrari's public posture was flawless, glowing remarks about their current lineup, deflective answers to any probing questions, but away from microphones and cameras, the reality was no longer disguised. The statistics, the lack of consistent podium finishes, and the absence of a title challenge were undeniable signs that the Hamilton venture was not delivering the return the Scuderia's leadership had envisioned. Fred Vasseur, a man who weighed decisions in terms of outcomes rather than sentiment, did not waste time in getting to the core of the matter. In a meeting arranged with such stealth that even their immediate aides were unaware, he sat opposite Toto Wolff in a quiet, unremarkable venue far from any racing hub. His words were delivered without theatrics, only certainty. "If this goes ahead," he said, voice level but unyielding, "it will be done entirely on our terms. Russell joins us, young, adaptable, and ready to be shaped into the driver we require. You want Lewis back? That is the cost." For Wolff, it was a proposition that cut into the heart of Mercedes' carefully plotted future. George Russell was not merely a skilled racer. He had been cultivated within their system as the natural successor, a driver whose feedback, work ethic, and racecraft had been honed to carry the team into its next era. Letting him go would mean rewriting years of succession planning. Yet the possibility of restoring Hamilton to the team, reigniting a partnership that had delivered so many titles, was too potent to dismiss. It was not nostalgia that swayed him, but the calculation that Hamilton, in the right machinery and environment, could still be the weapon that defined a championship fight. Once Wolff decided the door could be opened, the process became a tightly controlled operation. Legal teams on both sides went into lockdown, working in secure locations where documents never left the premises. Every clause in Hamilton's Ferrari contract was reviewed, tested for vulnerabilities, and assessed for potential buyout strategies. Sponsorship agreements, image rights, and performance bonus structures were mapped against possible exit routes. Simultaneously, Russell's Mercedes contract was dissected in search of the cleanest legal pathway to Maranello, one that would avoid disputes yet provide Ferrari with the assurances they demanded. The paddock went about its normal rhythm, oblivious. Hamilton's social media post, a carefully staged, seemingly casual image paired with an ambiguous caption, was seen by fans as little more than a personal statement or a subtle jab at Ferrari. In truth, it was the first deliberate move of a strategy already well underway, a signal disguised as noise. In Brackley, the inner circle at Mercedes operated like an independent cell, keeping their activities outside the main factory flow. Meetings took place in unmarked offices or rented spaces under unrelated corporate names. Large-scale whiteboards were wiped immediately after each use, and all digital correspondence traveled through encrypted channels that auto-erased after viewing. Every person involved knew the stakes. One leak could kill the deal before it reached maturity. In Maranello, Vasseur managed the dual realities with care. Publicly, he was all praise for Hamilton's commitment and professionalism, maintaining the illusion of stability. Privately, he was already orchestrating a soft landing for Russell. A select group of engineers and performance analysts began preparing detailed adaptation models, using disguised simulator sessions to gauge how Russell would handle Ferrari's unique front-end characteristics. Every element was compartmentalized. No one outside the chosen few saw the full picture. As the framework crystallized, both sides began running simulations, not on track, but on paper. They mapped sponsor reactions, drafted multiple announcement scripts tailored for different timing scenarios, and plotted how to seize control of the media narrative from the first second. Decoy leaks were prepared in case rumors broke too early, ready to mislead journalists and rivals alike. Russell, still unaware of the full scope, noticed only subtle irregularities. Strategic briefings that no longer included him, sudden schedule changes without explanation, and inquiries about his long-term plans coming from unfamiliar channels. Hamilton, by contrast, moved with practiced composure, maintaining the appearance of business as usual while privately tracking every milestone in the operation's progress. The talks crossed continents and time zones, often taking place in hotel conference rooms during race weekends under the guise of unrelated corporate meetings. Draft agreements were ferried by hand in sealed folders, never sent electronically. Each step was a blend of calculated patience and quiet urgency, a process that would seem, when it finally became public, to have materialized overnight, though in reality it had been built brick by brick in total shadow. To the outside world, all that could be seen was that single, enigmatic image on Hamilton's social feed. Millions viewed it, debated it, and dissected it, unaware that they were looking at the first visible ripple of a move designed to upend the competitive order, a wave that was already gathering force, ready to crash over Formula One before anyone realized it was coming. For Hamilton, leaving Ferrari was a decision layered with complexity, a calculated break from an era he had once envisioned as the crowning chapter of his career. When he first arrived at Maranello, the allure was undeniable, the weight of history woven into every stitch of the red overalls, the intoxicating energy of the Tifosi, the promise of writing his name alongside the most revered champions in motorsport. Standing on the Monza podium, bathed in a roaring chorus of voices chanting his name, he had felt an almost cinematic sense of belonging. But the romance of the red came with a sharper edge. Under Ferrari's spotlight, every misjudged corner became magnified, every pit wall decision scrutinized to exhaustion, and every victory, no matter how hard-earned, measured against an ideal shaped around a teammate whose style fit perfectly with the team's prevailing vision. The realization that this chapter had reached its natural conclusion came gradually, in the quiet moments between races and in the private conversations far from the paddock's chaos. There were no dramatic fallouts, only the dawning understanding that his ambitions demanded a different environment, one where he wouldn't have to wrestle with the car's philosophy to find his speed, one where his feedback could translate directly into tangible results. His farewell message to the world wasn't a spur-of-the-moment reaction, it was a carefully planned statement, his way of steering the story before others could distort it. It was composed, direct, and unmistakably his. The decision was his own, the path forward was clear, and the next move was about potential, not nostalgia. In Brackley, the gears were already turning. Behind doors marked "Confidential," engineers pulled up years of archived telemetry from his most dominant seasons, layering it over the current car's behavior to identify every possible synergy. Simulator time was quietly allocated, disguised in schedules with neutral project names. In the Aero division, development priorities began to shift, not on paper, but in the subtle redistribution of resources toward designs that would suit his aggressive approach into high-speed corners and his uncanny ability to maintain tire life over long stints. Marketing teams worked under a blackout protocol, drafting early concepts for a launch that would feel less like an announcement and more like a cultural event, one capable of reaching far beyond Formula One's core audience. Meanwhile, in Maranello, the mood was controlled but noticeably altered. Technical discussions with Hamilton became increasingly focused on the short term, stripped of the layered debates about future car concepts that had once filled hours of debriefs. The collaboration was still sharp, professional, but the depth of investment had shifted. Some crew members respected the way he maintained his commitment to delivering points despite the inevitability of change. Others kept interactions strictly work-related, perhaps bracing themselves for the void his departure would leave. Vasseur, calm and calculated as ever in front of cameras, was already strategizing privately about the driver reshuffle that would follow. Across the paddock, rumors moved fast but missed the mark. There was talk of retirement, of a season-long break, even of a leap into another racing category entirely. Few recognized the truth, that a reunion was in motion between driver and team, a pairing that had once defined domination and was now being reassembled with the same intent, to take control of the championship from the very first race and never let it go. For Hamilton, anticipation was building with every race. He could already imagine stepping back into Mercedes HQ, the metallic scent of the factory, the muted whir of machines shaping components, the gleam of trophies lined up like milestones. Familiar faces from past triumphs would meet his gaze with a shared understanding, while younger engineers and mechanics, who had only known his legend through data and videos, would be about to witness it in real time. The car awaiting him wouldn't be just a piece of engineering, it would be a weapon, sharpened by the symbiosis between his instinct and the team's relentless innovation. When the truth became public, it would not be a ripple, it would be a detonation. Rivals would scramble to revise strategies, media outlets would reframe entire narratives, and sponsors would compete to align themselves with a partnership already being hailed as the most formidable on the grid. His years in red would be remembered for flashes of brilliance, moments of resilience, and the stubborn pursuit of progress in the face of constraints. But the reunion with Mercedes would be defined by something else entirely: unfinished business, shared purpose, and the conviction that the road ahead still had championships to offer. And in the heart of Ferrari's garage, as the hum of preparation filled the air before another race weekend, Charles Leclerc would know that the next time he glanced across the grid at a Mercedes, there might once again be Lewis Hamilton behind the visor, eyes locked forward, ready to fight for every inch of asphalt, and to reclaim a throne he never believed was truly out of reach.